So if we're going to address Locke's epistemology, if we're going to talk about Locke's epistemology, um, the question arises, and I guess there shouldn't be a question mark there, but there should be a question mark in the next bullet, which is what is epistemology? So if we're going to talk about Locke's epistemology, then we should review what epistemology is. And I did mention this when we first talked about Descartes. Um, Remember, with Descartes, we have the I think, the I am, I exist, is both an epistemic claim as well as a metaphysical claim, right? Metaphysics being the branch in philosophy that deals with reality, and the I exist for Descartes is a metaphysical claim because it is a claim to there being one real thing in the world at that point in the meditations. Basically, that I am real, right? I exist, right? That's a claim to existence. But remember that Descartes also pointed out that he knows he exists. In fact, remember, he's looking for something certain, and that is what he finds, right? He knows that he exists. So then the I am is also a claim to knowledge, right? And so again, epistemology is basically the the branch that studies knowledge. That's what it is. It's the branch that studies knowledge in philosophy, the branch that focuses on knowledge. So we need to talk about Locke's epistemology. Let's come back to Locke's epistemology. This one without a question mark, accurately without a question mark, because of David Hume, because of what we're going to look at when we look at David Hume. There's a sense in which David Hume, another very famous philosopher, presupposes Locke in many ways. He thinks that Locke was right about his basic epistemology, his basic theory of knowledge, or how we know anything. So this brings us to an important distinction in modern philosophy. Remember, Descartes is the first of the moderns. He's an early modern philosopher. And by the way, so is Locke. Locke is also an early modern philosopher. Remember, I think the first or second day we met, I talked about how there are early, middle, and late modern philosophers. Kant, for example, being an example of a late modern philosopher. Well, both Locke and Descartes are early moderns. But throughout the whole time period, there is a distinction between what we can call two schools of philosophy, and that is empiricism versus rationalism. Locke is the very first empiricist, and he's definitely an important empiricist. Descartes is the first rationalist. Rationalism here means that Descartes valued reason more than anything in terms of knowledge. So for Descartes, reason is what gets us knowledge, is another way of saying that. One of the theses that we'll see later on is that the idea of God is innate, that we're born with an innate idea, namely the idea of God. And that is a rationalist-like kind of thesis. Not to say that all rationalists believe that, but that believe that we have innate ideas and that God is an innate idea. But rationalists definitely think that the mind has certain apparatus that's built in, whereas empiricists do think that there is some of that. But for empiricists, what matters more is experience. And by experience here we mean sense data, that all of our ideas are attained via the senses. So in order to understand this, think of an infant that is first experiencing the world, and think about how an infant begins to learn the world. An infant will smell, will see, right, will taste, will touch. I mean, they literally put things in their mouth, right? And in a way, by doing that, they're learning something about the world, right? Well, they use all their senses to experience the world, and they're forming ideas at the same time they're doing that. So imagine the first time they encounter red, and they then have that experience of the color red. or imagine the first time that they smell milk. I guess is the first one of the first things they'll smell, right? Milk, or taste milk, right? Well, they'll have that idea of milk, of red, um, and they that notice that by idea here I mean something like a concept, right? Except with the kinds of ideas I'm talking about, they are sense ideas, ideas due to the senses, right? Basically due to the senses. So that's what the empiricist privilege above all is, the fact that that pretty much what really matters for knowledge is that we get these ideas via the senses. The word empiricism is related to the word empirical, which means experience, basically. Experience of the world is what we're talking about here. And for them, that matters more than reason. Again, reason, think of reason as more of something that mathematicians engage in. Mathematicians would be better examples of rationalists than empiricists would. Not to say that there aren't mathematicians who are empiricists, but basically that's the idea here. One values reasons or privileges reason, while the other school values experience, the empiricist. And so, just to give you the names here, this doesn't matter a lot, but just so you know, the empiricists are Locke, David Hume, and another philosopher by the name of George Berkeley, which, by the way, Berkeley in California is named after. Same spelling, different pronunciations, because Berkeley is the British English pronunciation and Berkeley is the American pronunciation. So those are the three empiricists. Locke, three famous empiricists of the modern period. There are others after that, but John Locke, David Hume, and George Berkeley. The rationalists are Descartes, René Descartes, a guy named Spinoza, and then another guy named Leibniz, who you might have heard of, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz co-invented calculus with Newton. Notice there that two out of the three rationalists, so Leibniz, give me 1 second here, Leibniz and Leibniz being Leibniz being a mathematician, and Descartes being a mathematician. Basically, that means that, again, that rationalism is more akin to empiricism. I'm sorry, rationalism is more akin to mathematical learning than empiricism is, right? Probably the mathematicians like Leibniz and Descartes felt more at home with mathematics. Okay, but let's go back to Locke. Locke thinks that because he was an empiricist, and because he's basically the founder of empiricists, he basically thought that the mind was a blank slate. So when you're an infant, he thought that your mind was just totally, completely blank. Nothing there contained any kind of knowledge, or I don't know, maybe, well, the possibility for knowledge has to have been there, but basically just a completely blank slate. And the Latin term for this is tabula rasa. He thought that the mind was a tabula rasa. That's just a Latin word for this. So think of a chalkboard that's completely blank, and then we put stuff in it. Or think of a canvas, a painter with a blank canvas and then paint stuff on it. That is what he thought the mind was like. And so remember earlier I spoke about infants. Well, the infants are putting in all these sense ideas into it, right? And that once they put in these sense ideas, the color red, the smell and taste of milk. Once they do that, then they start having ideas, right? And they can start learning. So that's his famous phrase, tabula rasa. What does he mean by ideas? Well, again, in this case, in this narrow sense, we're talking about sense ideas. Color, taste, right? The color red, the color blue, whatever, the taste of milk, the taste of chocolate, so on and so forth. Those are sense ideas. But Locke was very well aware, of course, that we have other ideas that are more complex than that. And in fact, he makes a distinction between simple and complex ideas. And one of the key questions he's always asking himself in his epistemology is, how do we get the idea of identity, first of all, to begin with? How do we get the idea of diversity to begin with? And in fact, the very first essay we're reading here from Locke, or the essay we're reading from Locke, we're not reading other Locke essays, is of identity and diversity, right? How do we get these ideas? So think of more complex ideas that are not ideas of something just like red, right? The idea of government, the idea of a nation state. Those are very complex ideas, and so Locke's work, philosophical work, is in a way trying to unpack how we get those ideas based on the fact that we have simpler ideas. So he does make the distinction between complex and simple ideas. Complex ideas being something like government, the state. Simple ideas being things like colors, right? Red is simple in some sense, right? Smells are simple in some sense. So that's I'm just telling you what his method is here, and the reason I'm doing that is, and if, by the way, if you want to refer to this would be on page 33, where he explicitly, again, that's of our book, of our assigned book, right? There he's explicitly asking this question: how are these ideas of identity and diversity formed? Well, by that point, he's talking about these ideas, or he's referring to these ideas, or understanding these ideas as complex ideas, because the idea of identity is a complex idea, the idea of diversity is a complex idea, and so he's already presupposing that the people that he's talking about here who are trying to understand these or use these ideas are adults, right? They're not infants anymore. I guess the answer to a question like how do infants learn the idea of red is simple, right? Well, they just look at red, they perceive red, right? The milk, they perceive milk, right? So those ideas, it's easy to give an account of how they get those ideas, but it's harder to account for the complex ideas. And so a lot of his philosophical work is to basically give an account of how some of these ideas are formed. And so again, the reason I'm mentioning this is because